Happy 2024! I hope you all had a fun and relaxing holiday break and that you're ready and raring for another great season of The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. Joining me now to kick off the year with some of his famous predictions, Times Union columnist Chris Churchill. You do this every year, right? Like you have kind of a column where you postulate in a lighthearted way.
Generally, unless there's actual news to write about. If it's a slow turn of the year type situation, then yeah, I'll do something like that.
So in this case, you did. So I wonder if you will humor us and, read off a few of those predictions and maybe why you might have stuck them in there.
You're going to make me read my own stuff?
It's a unique form of torture, I know.
All right, well, I'll read the first one, and not really because it's my favorite, but because I should probably apologize for it. I said that in January, the Buffalo Bills are crushed 43-0 by the Cleveland Browns of all teams in the first round of the playoffs.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that's not informed by any sort of actual NFL knowledge. As a matter of fact, I've probably watched less than 5 minutes of professional football in the last year, so take that prediction for what it's worth. But then I say one day later, Governor Kathy Hochul cites the team's courage and New York spirit as justifications for her decision to give the Bills $900 million in state funding for the construction of a Scott Norwood training center in Lackawanna. So obviously I'm like poking fun a little bit at the state's ridiculous outlay for the new stadium. But the apology part comes in the Scott Norwood thing. I've had a Bills fan or two reach out to say that the Scott Norwood thing has gotten really old. And as a Red Sox fan, I can understand, like people bringing up Bill Buckner 30 years later. It does get you should probably have used a more obscure or interesting or at least less dated reference.
So isn't Bill Buckner is not 30, but 40 years ago almost?
Yeah, right.
So for those of us who have no idea who Scott Norwood is, would you humor me and just explain who he is?
Yeah, he's the field goal kicker who missed a field goal that would have won the Bills the Super Bowl. I forget what year it was, but it was during that run where they went to 4 straight Super Bowls.
Is that the wide right?
Yeah,
Gotcha.
That's the one. Yeah.
Well, hopefully your apology will be accepted by diehard Bills fans.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
What are some of the other predictions that you made that you think are noteworthy?
Well, I should say that, I don't actually expect any of these to come true. These are just basically about amusing myself mostly and hopefully amusing a few other people. Another one I should probably apologize for. I said that in October, Schenectady Mayor Gary McCarthy does nothing remotely noteworthy for the 7th consecutive month. That was probably a bit of a cheap shot, but, there's always going to be at least one cheap shot in a column like this, I suppose. I have Joe Rogan winning the presidency. Pretty ridiculous things.
Of course, the presidential election in 2024 is going to be huge news that you are probably going to, cover in earnest come, the later months of the year. So are you looking forward to that?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure everybody is. I mean, what could go wrong? It just seems like it's going to be a wonderful event for the country and humanity. I do still hold out some sort of hope that it will not be a Biden versus Trump election and that we won't be forced to choose between two of the most unpopular people in the country. But, and in this column, too, I do say that, in February, Trump withdraws from the presidential race, declaring that somebody who lost last time has no reason to run again, obviously playing on the fact that he's never conceded that he actually lost. A month later, I have Joe Biden declaring that he won't run after one of his German shepherds gets loose and bites a donkey, obviously playing on some of the trouble he's had with his German shepherds.
Well, we will see. Anything's possible in 2024. One more sort of topic that I want to cover, which you kind of took a more serious look at, which is the population drop in New York State over the last year. What did you write about that? And what's important for your audience to take away from it?
Well, I was just saying that this has become kind of an annual tradition that I think the census releases its estimates, and it is important to say that they're just estimates. But they tend to release them every year around Christmas time. So every year at the end of the year, just heading into New Year's, we get this little notice that New York is again leading the nation in population decline, which is always like a little bit of gloom among the holiday cheer.
What are they measuring? What is population drop? Is that people who are leaving the state? Is that people dying? Is that everything?
It's everything, yeah. I mean, there's always a lot of people leaving the state. I think New York is always kind of unusual for its churn. There's always a lot of people, especially downstate, coming and going.
Right.
The upstate story is more about going than coming. There are large areas of upstate New York that have really emptied out over the last few decades. It's also important to note that the capital region is not one of them. All the pessimism about New York State and all the complaints about cost of living and no job opportunities and all those things don't really apply here. We are growing here, and we do have kind of for the moment at least, a pretty nice mix between relatively affordable housing and relatively good number of jobs. But downstate, obviously, it's the cost of living that pushes people out. And in other parts of New York, it's kind of a lack of opportunity. But neither of those factors are new stories. I think what is new is that we're not getting as many people moving into the state as we have in prior years, and whether that's COVID related or an immigration thing or any number of other factors, I'm not sure.
You think if the Buffalo Bills finally won the Super Bowl that
would do it?
Population would finally increase.
Yes. Everybody would look at snowy Buffalo and decide that's the place where I need to be. Now, Buffalo's a cool town.
Do you foresee this year that, the governor and the legislature and, they're going to make some effort to address this, even though it's something that's been happening for a while?
No, I doubt it. I don't think so. To admit that population decline is a problem is to admit that leaders in state government are doing something wrong, So I don't think they're inclined to do that. And also, to be fair, the problem is incredibly difficult to solve. It's not something you can just,
snap a finger, say, here's an investment in something, and all of a sudden the population decline was reversed.
Yeah, and some people would say, well, if the state started, reducing its regulatory and its tax burden and all these various things, that it would help. And that is probably true, but that would just require such a mind shift. I don't think the legislature is capable of doing that.
Well, we will see if all of your predictions come true.
I kind of hope that a lot of them do not, because, I'm not. Joe Rogan might be a pretty good podcaster, depending on your taste in podcasts, but
maybe not a politician.
Maybe not a good president. Yeah.
You can read more of Chris Churchill's predictions at timesunion.com. You can also go to timesunion.com/newsletters/Churchill and subscribe to his weekly email newsletter. It'll come right to your inbox. We are going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll speak with the aunt of the 9-year-old girl who was abducted from a state park in October. Stay tuned.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Marshall. The disappearance of a 9-year-old girl in Saratoga County last fall made national headlines. The child was missing for nearly 48 hours. There was an Amber Alert issued. She was found alive in a trailer with 46-year-old Craig Ross Jr. on a property in Milton. Investigators tracked her there after they recovered a fingerprint from a ransom note left in the mailbox at the girl's family's home that matched with Ross. Since then, Ross has been charged with kidnapping and several counts of predatory sexual assault. Ross is also currently being investigated in connection with the murders of 2 girls in the early 2000s, though police have not disclosed any such connection at the moment. If convicted, Ross Jr. could face 25 years to life in prison. The girl's family has not spoken much publicly since she was found. But her aunt, Jené Sena, recently sat down with Christy Gustafson Barletti for an interview about how the family's doing and their new goal of pursuing victim rights advocacy.
How are you doing? How's your family doing? And how is she doing?
Everybody's doing okay. It's one day at a time. That's really the best way I can describe it. This is damaging in so many ways, to say the least, I guess, for fear of it sounding like a major understatement. Very damaging, and isn't going to go away, anytime soon. So it's just about us moving forward, focusing on her moving forward and having the normal childhood and the normal life that it should have. We're really focused now on just making sure that justice gets served, really just taking it one day at a time.
Talk to me a little bit about what you've been doing from a victims advocacy role since your niece was found in the last, say, 2+ months.
My sister-in-law and I have been keeping a dialogue open and jotting things down. Things that are like, that literally her list says why. Like, it's titled why. Like, why is this way? And does a victim have to tell, especially a child, have to tell her story, over and over and over again? We've been keeping kind of a list going of what we feel like really has been harmful in some way to our family, and then figuring out, okay, now is there something that we can do with this information? My original idea obviously was, okay, whenever we're ready, we should talk to somebody. And so that is when I approached Good Morning America to do that segment that we did.
Now to an ABC News exclusive with the family of the little girl who was abducted on a camping trip and found 2 days later. For the first time, her aunt is talking about that dramatic rescue. She sat down with our Ariel Reshev about how quickly abductions can happen and the lasting impact for the victims.
Yes, so tell us a little bit about what your goal or your hope was with talking to them, because the way I understand it is you're really looking for all victims, but especially children, to essentially have an advocate, a formal advocate on their behalf. So like you said, they don't have to keep retelling their story. They don't have to kind of keep rehashing and reliving, which is something that's obviously traumatic.
They do have an advocate, like a victim is given an advocate, but then that same person doesn't stay with them the entire time or isn't available to them each time they have to give a deposition or tell their story. So that is an issue that we saw just standing out that could be easily, I think, rectified with just some streamlining of how it's done. And then that would make the victim a lot more comfortable, and especially a child, a young victim, to be a lot more comfortable with someone sort of that they trust. And we were kind of thinking the fact that it isn't this way to begin with, and the fact that they have to tell their stories so many times, could really deter victims from coming forward in the future. You have victims out there that will get a lawyer, victims' rights attorney, and like Gloria Allred, she's, very famous for that. And so everything lends itself to the onus being on the victim. Like the victim has to proactively press the charges, especially when it's a sex crime. Then, the victim has to advocate for themselves.
So you're talking with state legislators about potential changes based on the list you and your sister-in-law came up with, correct?
I was working with Tedesco's office on legislation. I reached out to them because I knew that they were moving forward with legislation to put cameras in state parks. So I said, obviously, this is like the minimal thing that could be done. And if you need any help, and, connected them with Assemblyman Angelo Santa Barbara, who's the assembly sponsor for this bill. And I know they're working on getting more police presence in the state parks because the rangers are amazing, but there just isn't enough of them. So, I know they're working on some things on the state level. I would like and plan to reach out to Kirsten Gillibrand because she does a lot on behalf of victims' rights, and to see if there's something we can move forward on the federal level.
What other concerns are on your list? Things that you want to draw attention to?
A lot of the questions I get asked the same questions over and over again about her and her case and stuff like that. And, a lot of people ask me, why did it take so long for the Amber Alert to go out when they essentially knew she was taken? Because the bloodhounds were on the scene very early on and her scent stopped. So you kind of have to know she was put in a car and taken. So why wasn't the Amber Alert sent out then? And it's because there's a protocol that the Amber Alert follows. And so there's a lot of questions like, should that protocol be changed? Should there be, different scenarios added to it? It's really more set up to protect, I guess, or kind of, locate custodial abductions. And that really is like 3/4 of abductions. The stranger abduction scenario is very rare. So I think the Amber Alert is sort of set up for the larger, possibility. But should it also, accommodate someone like my niece who was taken by a stranger by, all intents and purposes. So, people ask me all the time, why did it take so long? And I'm like, I don't know. I just know there's a protocol and it was followed.
Yeah, because it was
about 14, I think we figured it out. We were trying to figure it out the other day based on, when Trisha called the state police and then when the Amber Alert actually went out. And I believe it was about 14 hours.
Obviously, I think you're in a rare situation here where you're a journalist and you're also a family member. So you probably see this story differently than most people. And obviously, as you know, this certainly dominated local news, but it also was heavy in the national news as well. So from a journalist standpoint, what do you think media, and I'm talking mainstream media, yes, there are the YouTubers and the citizen journalists and the crazy people on social media we've talked about and things like that. But I'm talking the more average mainstream media, both national and local. But what are some things that in cases like this, whether it's a sexual victim case or an abduction case or things like that, that how things should be or could be handled differently when you do see it from both sides, the journalist side and the family member side?
Working in this type of industry, you see terrible stories, day in and day out. Sometimes you're covering them. Sometimes you're listening to, like early on in my career, listening to scanners, just terrible news, but you become desensitized to it. And you really, I think, develop this coping mechanism where you step back and you're not in it, so it's not that you don't have empathy, but you're not, you're pulling your emotions and your feelings away, and you have that ability to separate that. And so I think as journalists, when we're covering a story that's really sensitive, and here we have a living, breathing child, she's a victim, but she's here. She's here to tell the tale, to live the rest of her life, to have the normal childhood she deserves. And so I think that sometimes we forget, because we're so focused on the details of a story and what are the main details and the who, what, why, when, and where, and what has to get out to the public and what do we have before anybody else. And what, we get focused on that and we forget that this is a real person, especially with local and community, like she's living within this community. And not only is she seeing these stories, but her peers are and her family. So there has to be some way where we can report the facts, the important facts, because that's our job, right? But also being sensitive to the victim and the victim's families. And so I think that there can be some consistency with the way it's reported. Some outlets were reporting her name still. Some were saying, we're not going to say her name anymore because she's a victim and she's a minor. Some were still using her photo, some weren't. A lot of it wasn't ethical, in my opinion. And I would never knock my fellow journalists because I know how hard this industry is and we don't get paid enough and all that other stuff. So it's like, I'm not knocking it, but I I just think we all have to just step back and say, does the public really need to know this? Is this in the best interest of the victim? Is this triggering and hurtful for the victim's family? And that has been talked about lately. There's been a lot of talk about trigger warnings. And again, some publications use them, some don't. And, it's up to the discretion of the publication. So maybe, there's a trigger warning, and maybe it's not using her name and the words, terrible, damaging words that relate to the charges in a headline. And some publications did both. And it's like, that is going to stick forever. She did not deserve this. She did not ask for this. She will want to move on with her life. She wants to move on with her life. And it's like, this is permanent now. So I think we can kind of collectively put ourselves in the shoes of the victim. And I can see how desensitized I am, and even in the beginning, like, I guess it worked to my benefit because I was able to contact the media when she was missing and really speak kind of articulately, because I do this for a living, and I kind of took myself out of it, even though it was happening to my niece. And then I would go randomly, cry privately, and then get back in front of a camera and, clarify the details that were incorrect on the Amber Alert. I had people commenting on social media, oh, she seems so cold. Like, she must have had something to do with it. And I'm like, no, I do this for a living. Like, I'm able to separate myself, but it's so odd when it's, happening to you and it's your own family. But I knew what I had to do, and I had a job to do, and we had to find her.
I mean, people saying that you seemed cold was just the tip of it, right? There were ridiculous things that people said online that was just so out there. As a journalist and as a family member, how do you compartmentalize that? Because you really did. You spoke for the family. You got all the information out there. You made sure the information was correct. You were an advocate then. You're an advocate now. How did you stay so focused and not feel deterred by some people who were just nasty, awful humans toward you and your family with this?
It's hard. I think in the beginning, like, we honestly didn't see a lot of it. Thankfully, we were so busy and there was so much out there. And I was on my phone the entire time it was dinging from messages. And most of them, and this is something we've talked about too, like, the majority were people that were praying, were well-wishers, were like, what can we do? We'll do anything. I mean, people were like rallying from the craziest places, England, France. So I think focusing on that and the fact that we were like, the outpouring was amazing. And if you talk about like the power of prayer, whether you believe in it or not, there were 1 million people praying for her at one time. We got this rare scenario where she was found and, so by all accounts healthy. So it was kind of like, focusing on that. And then you would have the people that would there were people sending messages saying this happened because you don't watch your kids, or just really heartless things. And it's like, they don't know the facts of the case. Like, they don't know what happened, and there's stuff that's not released to the public. So why are you making that judgment and then taking the time to email people that are going through a horrible thing? I mean, it's just so horrible. Now at this point, we're so grateful that we have the outcome that we have and that we have the opportunity to move forward. So the negative stuff doesn't even really matter.
The Times-Union has chosen not to identify the child by name or to use her photo. Both have been removed from our website and social media. You can read our full coverage of this story, or as always, read more about anything that we discuss on this podcast at timesunion.com or any of our social channels. All right, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with more from inside the newsroom. The Eagle is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from the Times-Union digital team and the newsroom. Special thanks this week to Chris Churchill and Christy Gustafson Barletti for their contributions to this episode. It's been 15 years since 12-year-old Shalik Rainwalker vanished. His disappearance from rural upstate New York was ruled a probable child homicide. But no one has ever been charged, and his body has never been found. This is Rainwalker, the Lost Boy. I'm Jessica Marshall.
And I'm Wendy Libertor.
In this podcast from the Times-Union, we'll take a deep dive into this mystery, the case of a missing child that has unsettled New York's capital region and beyond for more than a decade.
Available now, wherever you listen to podcasts.